Hello, everyone joining us this evening. Our webinar session with Melinda Myers about attracting hummingbirds to the garden will begin in just a couple minutes. My name is Kelly from Milwaukee Public Library. We'll get going in just a few minutes here. We're just waiting for everyone to join us for the webinar tonight. So thanks for being here. Hello again to everyone joining us. Get started in just one moment. Right. I go ahead and get started. So, hello again, everyone. My name is Kelly. I am the Adult Programming Coordinator for Milwaukee Public Library, and very pleased to welcome back Melinda Myers, gardening expert and author. Tonight's webinar topic will be Attracting Hummingbirds to the Garden, sponsored by We Energies, and just a little bit of housekeeping. So, on the bottom of your screen, you'll see there is a chat button that you can use to chat with each other. And also, we would love it if you would drop into the chat where you're tuning in from. And also, if there are any library viewing parties here, I do see Mule Public Library in, let's see, Seymour, Wisconsin, 6 participants. Hi there, thanks for joining. So feel free to share where you're tuning in from. I will share a link to the handout in the chat. We did send that out earlier to registrants, but we'll share that again in the chat in just a moment. And then after Melinda's presentation, we'll have time for some Q&A. So if you can share your questions in that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, we'll get to those after Melinda's presentation. And of course, we are recording this webinar, so that will be emailed out within a few days along with the handout. And then we typically have some follow-up information that we share out as well. So all of that will be sent to you within a few days here. And without further ado, I'm very happy to hand it over to Melinda. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks to all of you. And I was so excited to see so many libraries joining us. I think we all love hummingbirds, or you wouldn't be here tonight, right? They add motion and interest. They're pollinators that are often overlooked because they're very busy as they're sipping nectar, spreading pollen, and they do lots of good things for the environment. Kelly mentioned thanks to We Energies for sponsoring. They've sponsored our library program the last few years, and their sponsorship allows us to provide this for you free of charge. Thanks also to Kelly and her team for hosting the event. We appreciate that support, and all the libraries through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan as well as Wisconsin. Your partnership has helped us reach a lot of new, experienced, and avid gardeners. So thank you very much for your partnership as well. And all of you joining from all over the country. I see we have quite a few people joining us from all over Canada and the US. Well, when we're trying to bring in hummingbirds, it's kind of like trying to support any wildlife or ourselves, right? Food, water, and shelter. If we provide it, they will come. This is not my picture. Dawn, who works for me, has found lots of great video and photos. Some we've taken, but a lot are from photographers who are willing to share, and we've credited at the bottom. One of my goals is to see one of these hummingbird nests. If you've seen one, you're very lucky. We have hummingbirds at our property, and we're trying to figure out where they are nesting. I think the easiest thing to do is to grow hummingbird plants. It's self-cleaning, right? You don't have to scrub, you don't have to do it. And if you plan right, you can have a food source spring through fall. So you help them as they migrate north and spend the summer, hopefully, in your landscape and before they head south. So, a couple of things to look for when you're doing hummingbird friendly plants. Typically, they like tubular flowers, especially brightly colored. Reds, orange, and purples tend to be their favorites, but you'll see them at other colored flowers as well. One of the cool things about hummingbirds is not only do they feed on nectar, but they also eat insects. It's a source of protein they need. Aphids, tiny spiders, flies, mosquitoes, gnats, beetles, leafhoppers, caterpillars. So they're helping manage garden pests as we get entertained by their visits and they help pollinate our plants. One of the things I learned as I was preparing for this is that they also enjoy the sap when sapsuckers, pound into our trees to access the sap. The hummingbirds will also take advantage and lap up some of that. There's a link on the handout for information on some of the other sources of food and benefits hummingbirds provide. So check that out. So here are just a few. Well, there's a lot, but there's even more hummingbird friendly plants. I want to take a spring and then we'll go into summer and into fall. Some of the first plants to emerge in the garden, the spring ephemerals, Virginia bluebells, native to eastern, southeastern United States. The pink buds open up to these beautiful blue flowers. Unfortunately, the whole plant dies back. I shouldn't say unfortunately, but you need to plan for that, right? So it's a good food source early as the hummingbirds are arriving, depending on where you live. And then after it's done blooming, the plant eventually, the leaves die back to the ground. That's normal. And so just be prepared for either masking that void or interplanting it. I like to mix these with hostas because they're shade tolerant and daffodils, and they do spread readily. Bleeding heart, the common bleeding heart blooms first, and then our native fringed bleeding heart. The fringed bleeding heart is native to the Appalachian Mountain area. The common bleeding heart puts on this great show, somewhat like the Virginia bluebells. Midsummer, the leaves die back. Now, one thing you can do is once it's done blooming, cut it back halfway. That tends to encourage new growth so you have leaves all season long. Otherwise, just plan for that void, put something in front of it. So as this one declines, the plant in front takes over. Fringe bleeding hearts have leaves all summer. Just make sure that they have afternoon shade to avoid scorch. Big bloom right after common bleeding heart and sporadically throughout the summer. A lot of details of plant size and some of the features are on your handout. So I want you to be able to enjoy the pictures, maybe think about the ones you want to add. Oh, I have that. That's great. So you don't have to worry about, oh, how tall, how big is it going to be a problem? Lungwort is another shade tolerant plant. One of the things I like about lungwort, its hairy leaves tend to be resistant to deer. So if you're having struggles with hostas, you might want to try lungwort. There are some with larger leaves, solid green, speckled. Some of you in areas that have an even more humid summer than we do here in Wisconsin, where I'm based, may have problems with powdery mildew. It won't kill the plant. It just causes that kind of white growth on the leaves. Looks like someone sprinkled baby powder on them. I heard a gardening expert out of Pennsylvania say she grows the variegated variety so nobody knows if it has powdery mildew or not. You'll find these in whites and pinks and kind of even a raspberry red. Our native columbine, as well as the hybrids, are excellent hummingbird plants. If you look at those spurs, that's where all the nectar resides. So you don't want to get the spurless type. Now, our native columbine, full sun to part shade, it does reseed readily. So if you're tired of thinning out all those extra seedlings, you might want to take down, deadhead it once the flowers fade. The hummingbirds won't be visiting those anymore. So once they fade, you can cut them back. Otherwise, let them reseed. They'll fill in. It's kind of like free plants. I have some in my back garden, and I'm always surprised where they show up. Iris. You could start the season with dwarf bearded iris, then the intermediate, then the tall bearded iris. Those need full sun. The rhizomes are planted near the soil surface. Siberian iris comes next in between, and it's a good plant to join spring into summer garden plants. Right now, I have some tall bearded iris and my Siberian iris just starting to bloom. So lots of food for the hummingbirds. Siberian iris is more shade tolerant, tolerates moist soil better than the bearded iris, and it tends to be more resistant to iris borer. Plus, it has great fall color and seed pods for year-round interest. beard's tongue or beard tongue. You'll hear the common name penstemon. Most of them like full sun, well drained to dry soil conditions. Foxglove beard's tongue, penstemon digitalis, and this is noted on your handout, is the one that's the most clay soil tolerant. So for those of you with heavier soil, check that one out. They all are very appealing to the hummingbirds as well as other pollinators. Nice vertical accent in the garden. Lupines. I think we have some friends from Texas who, the Texas bluebonnets, Lupinus perennis, native to various parts of North America. What I find with lupine is I have the best flowers late spring, early summer when we have cool temperatures. If we have a warm spring or summer starts out hot, boy, I don't get the flowers and the bloom on this plant. The leaves are nice, but we're really growing them for the flowers. They're starting to bloom around my neck of the woods right here. And so wonderful, moist, well-drained soils, cooler temperatures really help promote bloom as well. Give them room to grow and good airflow and good sunlight so you avoid reduce the risk of mildew. A couple of spring shrubs to consider, azaleas and rhododendrons. Azaleas are rhododendrons, rhododendrons are rhododendrons, botanically speaking. Early bloomers, funnel-shaped flowers. Azaleas tend to be deciduous, slightly different blooms. Both of them like moist, well-drained, slightly acidic soil, which makes it tough for a lot of us. They will take full sun to part shade, but really need sheltered from winter wind and winter sun for best results and survival. So I'm growing Karen. I planted it last year. I'm in a pretty windy location, don't have a lot of shade. I have sandy soil, and it came back this year. And so I'll be interested to see. I've had lots of gardeners tell me Karen was one of the hardiest, as well as Northern Lights series, if you're looking for hardy azaleas. Um, Encore is one that's a repeat bloomer for our southern friends. You're probably growing that one. Our native redbud, eastern redbud, the flowers appear on the branches and the trunk. The pink buds open to these lavender pink flower. The lavender pink buds open up to the pink flowers. They're edible, great for salads and things, but leave plenty for the hummingbirds. They're followed by, as you can see, the heart-shaped leaves are just starting to emerge. Those are green in summer, yellow in the fall, and they are in the pea family, so you'll have little pea pods hanging from the tree. Some people think they look messy. Some of us find it ornamental. When you see crabapple, you may be rolling your eyes if you have a crabapple like I do that came with my house. I had a great crabapple at my old house that I bought. This one is very susceptible to scab. So when you are picking a crabapple, look for those that are resistant to fire blight and apple scab. Apple scab's the disease that causes it to drop all its leaves midsummer, and then you have a bare tree. It doesn't kill the tree, it just looks ugly. And that's the one I have and that came with my house where I live right now. I also have a link on the handout you want to check out from Schmidt, which is a wholesale nursery. And they have a brochure or a flyer that I've linked to that tells you the size and shape of some of the more common crab apples. So if you're looking for a crab apple, this will give you some idea of size, flower color, and fruit. Besides disease resistant, look for those with persistent fruit. My crabapple I loved was a candy mint, light and dark pink blooms like you see here, resistant to scab. The fruit persisted and the birds came in the spring and cleaned it up. You may also find Baltimore Orioles nectaring on some of these trees. They tend to like the same things hummingbirds do. Drought tolerant once established. For a shrub, consider Fothergilla. It's a spring bloomer, blooms, starts flowering before the leaves come out, and then the leaves join the flowers. Fragrant, white, bottle brush type flowers hummingbirds love. Some varieties have a blue-green tinge to the leaf. Besides the blooms in spring, nice leaves all summer, great fall color. Full sun to part shade. Kind of watch for the rabbits. I've had a few gardeners tell me they've had problems with rabbits. I've always been a fan of lilacs. When I finally had my first house, we had a small city lot, and I didn't buy a lilac because Every plant had to have multiple seasons of interest. Well, I ended up buying a weeping one, grew it in a pot. Now it has a permanent spot in my garden here in my new home. But one of the nice things is bloomerang lilac. I've had great luck with those. 4 to 5 feet tall and wide, fragrant flowers in the spring. They rest and then they repeat bloom sporadically, say late July, early August throughout the end of summer. Those of you in milder climates, and I know we have some of you in milder areas, look for those that are low chill. And I put a link into that as well. I did some shooting out in California. One of my projects was interviewing celebrities in their landscape. And we did some garden tips while we were there. And I met a Midwest gardener who was then growing and gardening in the LA area. And they would get blocks of ice to surround their lilacs to give them the chill they needed to bloom. We gardeners are a crazy group. Weigela, very drought tolerant, and lilacs tend to be drought tolerant as well. Full sun, part shade, maybe light shade, more sun better, well drained soil. Big burst of bloom late spring, early summer. Some will bloom sporadically, and I find many of them put out more flowers in the fall. I find the hummingbirds visiting my Weigela that I have kind of spotted all over the landscape. Sonic Bloom is a repeat bloomer. So if you really like the look of Weigela and want more flowers, you can get them with variegated leaves, with bronze leaf, green leaves, white, pink, hot pink, purple, a variety of flower colors as well. So let's go into summer and summer petunias. If you hated petunias, which I used to hate petunias because I had to deadhead them when I was little, and I couldn't think of anything worse than those sticky stems and deadheading. But now there's so many better varieties that bloom nonstop, need minimal or no deadheading, don't get long and leggy. These, along with Million Bell calibrachoas, also attract hummingbirds. Again, the single varieties are the best when we're trying to bring in the hummingbirds because more nectar. And these are great as a ground cover, a hanging basket, a variety of ways. The old saying is be nasty to your nasturtiums. Don't over fertilize or you'll get all leaves and no flowers. Something you and the hummingbirds would appreciate are flowers. The flowers and leaves are edible. Just remove the reproductive parts, use them on a salad, stuff the flowers with cream cheese, or you can even dip them in egg batter and flour and fry them. But be sure to leave some for the hummingbirds. You'll find them in rose, red, orange, and yellow. I like the Alaska series that has variegated leaves. This one, if you were only going to plant one and well, maybe two got to have annuals, the Kufias. We were shooting for Great Lakes Gardener at our botanic garden, and we walked up to a trial bed, maybe 3 by 15 feet, and stirred up about 10 hummingbirds from the garden. I made the videographer and the audio engineer stop and wait, and we watched them come back, and then they'd leave when somebody'd come up and come back. It was great to see. I always have, this is firecracker or cigar plant. You may know vermillionaire, which is a common cultivar, or bat plant or tiny mice. Very popular. This is a great hummingbird plant. This one, the firecracker plant, Ignea, doesn't need deadheading, blooms all summer, drought tolerant, free flowering, and the hummingbirds love it. I always have a pot of these on my front steps and usually one in the back. So whenever I'm sitting or looking out the windows, I can always see hummingbirds visiting. Begonias, they are full sun to shade begonias. You want the type that will flower for you, like dragon wing and Bolivia and some of the others. Those are great hummingbird plants as well. Gives a little versatility for those of you that may not have great sunlight in your landscape. Check on size, make sure they flower and that it suits your needs. Great in containers or good as a bedding plant as well. Another one of my favorite plants is Verbena bonariensis tall verbena, but I will caution you, it does reseed readily. When I lived in the city, I was kind of the only person that was really gardening when we first moved there. And I planted the Verbena bonariensis and it brought the hummingbirds to my landscape, and I wasn't using feeders at the time. But other verbena, as you can see here, the trailing type will also bring in the hummingbirds. Verbena bonariensis is a biennial, usually buy them as transplants. You can start them from seed. They'll drop seed, and then you'll have plenty for years to come. Verbena canadense is a perennial one. I had good success growing it in Milwaukee when I was living in the city, very sheltered closer to the lake. It's a zone 5 perennial. And then these as annuals as well. Lantana, for my southern friends, make sure that it's not invasive in your area, heat and drought tolerant. Pretty free flowering. If you start getting the berries, just pick them off and that'll kick the plant back into bloom. A great butterfly plant as well as a hummingbird plant. Great in pots. If it grows as a shrub in your area, it's 3 feet tall. I have overwintered it indoors. It was an ugly looking transplant when I put it back out in spring. So I just buy new plants. It's a lot better to start. This is the other must-have plant. This is an Anise salvia, Salvia gigantea. And this is at Dawn's lake house, but look at that hummingbird going crazy. I grow black and blue, purple and black. This is red Roman. You'll find a variety of these. These, I was hardening off my plants for the last month, taking them in and out because we've had some pretty chilly nights. And I had the pot out in the day. I brought it in at night because it was a cold night. The next day, I didn't get it out right away. And the hummingbirds were out looking for that salvia because they know that it's good eats. And that's a big one. It is hardy to zone 7 too. Sorry, I wanted to mention that. And my friend, I should go back here actually. My friend in Eau Claire is successful overwintering these. She buries them, covers them with other plant material or mulch, and she's had success overwintering. They had formed these rhizomes or tuberous roots, I think they actually are. Every year I mean to do it, and every year I don't. So you might want to try that, or if you're in a milder area, it's a perennial for you and you're quite lucky. Zinnias, lots of zinnias on the market. They've kind of experienced a new, it's like we're all excited about them. Disease resistance, because if you've grown zinnias in the past, powdery mildew is a big issue. You will find single varieties like Sahara and Profusion, which are resistant to the mildew, tend to have less problems with leaf spot to the taller varieties. Again, the single varieties are the best. Look at all of the fertile flowers in the center. Those are the yellow where the nectar is held. There is nectar in the double forms as well. It's just a little harder for them to get to, and there's fewer fertile flowers. So heat and drought tolerant, look for disease resistance, great in containers. One of the cool things, you can start them from seed right in the garden. 8 weeks later, you'll have flowers. And so look at it as the mid to late summer into fall, kind of freshening of the garden. So, sometimes our early annuals are looking tired. Maybe you have some voids from your early spring perennials or early summer perennials, and those zinnias that you start from seed could fill that need. I'm growing a lot of abutilon this year, flowering maple. Um, it's been around a long time, and some of you may have been growing it for quite a while. Maybe 20, 25 years ago, I saw it being sold as a bedding plant, and for a few years, but I think people were a little shy in our neck of the woods to purchase it. Well, this year, I've seen this plant in almost every garden center I've shopped in and couldn't resist. I have some of the yellow and the peach, and I was excited to see that the hummingbirds like this one. I have it planted with some other hummingbird plants in a raised bed and in pots. So I'm real excited to see if the hummingbirds find them as appealing as some of the others. Full sun to part shade, moist, well-drained soil. Flowering tobacco, Nicotiana, you can find varieties that are 8 inches tall to those species that are 5 feet tall. Many are fragrant in the evening. Check the tag if fragrance is important to you. Butterflies and hummingbirds both like this plant. It does reseed, but keep in mind if you bought a hybrid, the offspring can be very different. I grew Nikki one year, and it's about a 14 to 16-inch tall flowering tobacco. The next year, I had some 8-inch tall plants and some 5 foot tall plants. So I left them all because, it was fun to see what developed, but eventually you may need to do a little thinning. Full sun, avoid hot afternoon sun or just ignore them. I'd recommended these to my mom and dad. When they used to live, when they were alive, they were in central Ohio, and they put them on the south side of the house. And my mom called me, goes, "These things need watering every day." And I'm like, "No, they don't. Just don't go out there between 4 and 6." So that was a bad recommendation on my part. So if you don't want to look at them kind of looking wilted, put them on an east face so that they get a little bit of shade in the afternoon. Spider cleome, you love or hate this plant. The straight species is about anywhere between 3 and 5 feet. There are dwarf cultivars like Rosalita, Senorita Rosalita. They are smell musky in the evening, so some people like it. Some people are like, don't put that by my patio or porch. But the hummingbirds love this one. It does reseed readily, so watch out for seedlings the next year. And again, if it was a hybrid, it may not come true from seed, but you'll have some free plants to decide whether to keep them or not. Mexican sunflower. I love Tithonia. It's hard to find transplants. You can start it from seed. Every once in a while, maybe a farmer's market or a garden center that tends to carry different annuals. Typically 3 to 5 feet tall, midsummer into fall bloomer, beautiful orange flowers. Fiesta del Sol is shorter, 3 feet tall. I love to combine this with purples. I have a garden in the back, which has a lot of purples, has orange butterfly weed, has some purple um, black lace elderberry with purple foliage. And then I have some other purple flowering plants. And so the orange just is a really nice companion with those blues and purples as well. It's an easy care plant, full sun, well drained to dry soil, makes a nice cut flower, but the neck tends to kind of flop, so you'll need a little wire if you'd cut a few to bring inside. And sunflowers. Who doesn't like sunflowers, right? You can find dwarf varieties, you can have the mammoth ones. They're fun to watch grow. It just seems like they grow a foot a day. Protect the seeds from birds because they do like to eat those seeds that you just put in the ground, and the seedlings as well. Deer will sometimes take out your young plants. I use floating row cover when I seed anything in the garden because I have lots of birds I want to support, but I don't want them eating my seeds. And so I'll plant my seeds, I'll cover it with floating row cover. It lets air, light, and water through, keeps the soil warm so those seeds sprout faster, and it protects it from the birds and then also the deer. As they grow, you may even need some repellent. Some of you know I work with Plant Skid. It's an organic rain resistant repellent. Or you may need to do a little fencing if deer are an issue. And I think a lot of us are dealing with it. So besides the hummingbirds, you'll see butterflies, you'll see bees. Then, of course, when the seeds come around, you'll see songbirds harvesting them. Um, the squirrels can be annoying, but it's fun to watch as they hang upside down to try to steal the seeds. And you might even get a few yourself to enjoy. For those of you in shady spots, consider fuchsia. It likes moist, well-drained soils. It needs shade and shelter from wind. So it's a great way to have a hanging basket or even a container. One of the things I'm seeing more and more garden centers do and more gardeners do is mix things up. So I needed a fuchsia early in the spring for some TV work I was doing to promote hummingbirds. And Pasquazi, who is my garden center partner in Lake Bluff, Illinois, I picked up one of their containers and they had coleus, begonias, and fuchsia. And so it was a nice mix of flowers. A hanging basket of fuchsia, that's beautiful too, but mixing it up is kind of nice. There are upright forms like thalia and gardenmeister, some with variegated leaves like autumnal, so and firecracker. So you can find a wide variety of fuchsia out there on the market. So if you're kind of like, oh, I'm tired of the same old, there's some new exciting ones on the market. And then mix it up, put some other shade tolerant plants with it. And then you could give that a little kind of a new look for an old fashioned favorite. Impatience. If you think shade, you probably think besides fuchsia, impatience. If you suffered downy mildew, I should say your impatiens suffered downy mildew, you'll want to be sure to buy mildew resistant impatiens. Some are beacon, glimmer, sun patience, which take sun and part shade, New Guinea impatiens, which take some sun and shade. So look for those that are resistant to downy mildew to avoid problems. I had a woman call and said she had some impatiens planted right along her walk. And there was a hummingbird standing on the walk, nectaring on the flowers of her impatiens. They are self cleaning, so they will drop the old petals as they put out new blooms. So that's a plus. But if you're a neat and tidy kind of gardener, I've had people say, oh, I don't put them by my patio. I can't stand the petals on the patio. It makes me crazy and I have to go out and clean them every day. So use them wisely. Pots in your shade gardens mixed with shade plants like you see your hostas. Some of your sedges that are shade tolerant, astilbe. So it's a nice one. You can have a mass of impatiens or spot them in as well. Our native impatiens, jewelweed, reseeds readily. You see all those kind of seed pods, there are hundreds of seeds in there. You'll often see this growing in moist or wet areas along the lake shore. It's very shade tolerant, grows pretty tall, like 3 feet tall. And when the seeds ripen, they shoot out. And so it can spread out in the garden. So you might check out jewelweed if you have a damp area, want something a bit taller, or trying to grow more native plants. But keep in mind, it is one that will spread. Ornamental onions. You could plant some of them from bulb in the fall if you have a cold enough winter, and you'll have flowers spring, summer, or fall. And then there are those that are sold at the perennial as a perennial at the garden center because they don't form a good solid bulb, more of a weak bulb and more of a fibrous root system. And so that gives us lots of opportunity. Besides hummingbirds, you can see the butterflies and bees love this. Long blooming, once established, drought tolerant. Occasionally, the early spring bloomers in my area will suffer some frost damage, the leaves, but the flowers will be fine. You could find the giant ones, which have flowers about the size of a small child's head. I like the autumn blooming one, the ornamental ones that are only about 6 inches tall with twisted blue-green leaves and flowers that are about an inch in diameter. And they bloom in the fall. So you'll be providing some nectar in the fall as the hummingbirds are passing through going south. Crocosmia, this may be invasive I think it's the Pacific Northwest. I think I put a link in there for you to check. It's a zone 5 perennial. So I found when I was trying this in some areas, animals were digging them, but also drainage was important. Once established, it was fairly drought tolerant. Long blooming, so you can see lots of buds on that long flower scape. And so they open up from the base to the tip, providing kind of continual bloom for a month or even more. Flat leaves like an iris. It grows about, 2.5 feet tall. Brilliant. Lucifer is this brilliant red bloom. So it's very striking in the landscape and one the hummingbirds love. Non-hardy for me, hardier for some of you in southern areas are the glads. Um, these are wonderful cut flowers, but they are a hummingbird favorite. You grow them from a corm. You can start planting them mid-spring and then every couple of weeks so that you can extend the bloom time one, if you want to use them as cut flowers, that gives you cutting flowers for a longer period, but also extends the time that you're providing food for the hummingbirds. The flowers open from the bottom to the top, and they come in a wide variety. I also hear it described as a rainbow of colors. And so you have lots of choices. They do benefit from some staking or some neighbors that will help hold them upright, maybe a grass that will help. I had one person I've always been meaning to try it, told me they took a piece of lattice, painted it, put it parallel to the ground and supported it with stakes. They let the glads grow through the holes in the lattice, and so it held the stems upright. The blooms were above the lattice, and they said it was great to watch the hummingbirds come and nectar on the flowers. So a little bit of interesting support rather than just a cage, and a way to hold those glads up and just add some structure as well as flowers and make them very available. You can plant quite a few glads. They only need to be 3 or 4 inches apart. You can save if they're not hardy in your area, you can dig them, allow them to dry in a warm location for a couple weeks and store them uncovered in a cool, dark spot. Cannas, you can start them indoors if you're in the north for earlier bloom. If they're hardy in your area, you're very lucky. The hummingbirds do love the flowers. If you plant them directly in the garden at the same time you would plant, say, your tomatoes when the soil's nice and warm, you're going to have nice leaves, and then it's kind of the fall hurrah. Instead of thinking, oh, these are bloom so late, maybe think of them as, again, something fresh in the late summer or fall garden. You can start some from seed, like Tropicana. I've had some good luck with that. Japanese beetles do like these, so you're going to have to make some decisions about hand picking the Japanese beetles, using organic spray like Beetle Juice or Beetle Gone if you want to control them, using a vacuum to suck them up, because you don't want to harm the hummingbirds coming to visit the flowers by using toxic insecticide. But great for full sun, light, shade. When you start seeing the seed pods that you see there, pull them off so that you'll have better bloom. Agapanthus. I was lucky enough to work in Southern California one summer and just really fell in love with these plants. They're great potted plants, so if they're not hardy in your area, I see more and more garden centers selling them to use on patios and decks. There are deciduous type, those leaves that die back, and evergreen type. I put a link from to an article by Susan Marr from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Gives you a little history and insight to this plant, but also ways to overwinter it. So if you're not in an area where it's hardy, and you don't want to invest every year, a couple things you can do. If it's an evergreen type, you can move it in and grow it like a house plant. As long as it's growing, you're going to water thoroughly, keeping it just slightly moist. If it slows down and goes dormant, run the soil much drier. If it's a deciduous type, then you can store it just like you do your cannas and dahlias. Either leave it in the pot, or you can take it out, dry out the bulb, and wrap it up and store it, both in a cool, dark location. The bulbs can stay in that pot all winter. They like to be pot bound and don't over fertilize. Otherwise, you'll get lanky growth and very few flowers. Foxglove. This is a biennial or short-lived perennial. So biennial, as you probably know, leaves come up the first year, over winter. The next year, you get more leaves and flowers. Set seed, drop seed, the mother plant dies. Those seeds sprout leaves the next year. Then the second year, they bloom. So if it acts like a biennial in your area, plant it 2 years in a row and then be sure to watch out for seedlings. If you're a neat and tidy gardener and you're out there early cleaning, sometimes you'll end up cleaning out some of those self-seeders. So keep that in mind. Maybe mark that location if you're trying to keep those seeds and the plants going. Um, Full sun, they'll take a fair amount of shade, tall plants, so nice vertical accent, good backdrop in the garden. Digitalis, that heart medicine is where it comes from. Uh, Before it's the non-synthetic, that's what it was based on. Um, on the University of North Carolina, Gardener's Toolbox. So, University of North Carolina Gardener's Plant Toolbox. If you just do UNC Gardener's Toolbox, it'll get you to that website. You can type in the name of the plant you want, and it has great information on hardiness, growing conditions, and things, but also on poison for people and pets and livestock. So that's one of the places I didn't list things that were poisonous because I didn't want to take a chance and miss one. So that's always a great place to go for that information. I mentioned annual salvias before. Those give you a summer full of bloom. The perennial salvias are a late spring, early summer bloomer. If you have heavy clay soil, Cardona is one that I find tolerates heavy clay soil quite well. Wazawee is one that's a more compact, and it's just this brilliant indigo bloom. A friend of mine, Roy Diblick, who wrote No, Know Maintenance, calls salvia his buddy plant. And I never understood. I was like, oh, you have to deadhead it to get the really showy second flush of blooms and then cut it back because it tends to flop open. Well, first of all, pick varieties that tend not to flop. Secondly, um, good drainage will really encourage long bloom. And then I now have sandy soil and I totally understand what Roy's talking about. Salvias are very easy. If you visit Lurie Gardens in Millennial Park in Chicago, if you get to Chicago, take a walk. It's a small garden full of cultivated and native plants, but they had summer blooming alliums with salvia, perennial salvia. And the salvia was fading, but still had kind of, you could kind of see even here, a little bit of a purple tinge to the sepals that were remaining. And that with the blue allium, it was quite striking. And it made me decide, even if you don't deadhead, you'll get a main flush, less showy second flush, and then if you get the right species, you don't have to do cutting it back and you'll have a nice show throughout the summer. A plant that does bloom all summer with very little care is catmint, but you want to make sure you select a clumper and one that does not reseed readily. You may have grown Walker's Low, which is not real low, 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. It tends to flop open midsummer, cut it back halfway. That's usually all you have to do. Honestly, we've had cooler temperature and a lot of rain this spring. And mine I had to cut back already. So sometimes I've had to cut them back a couple times. There have been introductions of smaller varieties like Junior Walker that's more like 20 inches, Cat's Meow and Cat's Pajama that have long flower spikes and much shorter compact plants. But the bees love this. The foliage is nice and it's a long bloomer, heat and drought tolerant. Coral bells. If you haven't found a coral bell you like, you haven't looked hard enough because there are hundreds, if not thousands of them. For a long time, they were being bred for the beautiful foliage and the flowers were secondary. But for those of us trying to get hummingbirds to the garden, we want both nice looking leaves and good looking flowers. The flowers, the main show is usually late spring, early summer, and then sporadically throughout the rest of the year. Full sun tolerant, and there are some that are fairly shade tolerant as well. So just check the label on the one that you're looking for. If you have problems with them melting out, if you have a lot of humidity where you live, look for the Velosa type. Heuchera velosa, they have the hairier leaves, and it might be a hybrid with another Heuchera and the Velosa so that you get some of that humidity tolerance. Daylilies. Each individual flower lasts one day, but as you can see, that flowerscape has maybe as many as 20 or 30 flower buds. Each flower, after it lasts a day and fades. If that annoys you, put it somewhere where it won't, or go out and deadhead every day. A friend of mine said, when I said, oh, I don't like to deadhead, and so I put mine where it won't bother me to see the faded flowers. And he goes, no, wrong idea, Melinda. Grab your glass of wine, remove those flowers, go out every day, look at your daylilies, check on your garden, remove the faded flowers. Well, I'll drink that glass of wine, but not getting out there every day to remove the faded flowers. But again, it's an aesthetic choice. So use it wisely for you. There are repeat blooming daylilies, those that'll put a flush of flowers on, rest, put another flush, and repeat a second or third time, usually on the label. One of the keys I found is if your repeat blooming daylilies aren't repeat blooming, then it's time to dig and divide. That seems to stimulate them to keep repeat blooming. Hostas. A lot of hosta growers grow for the leaves, but not the blooms. I've met many people go, I cut off those flowers. Well, this might be a reason to enjoy the blooms, white or purple. Some are fragrant. The hummingbirds will nectar on them, so there's an added benefit. And then if you let the seeds develop, juncos will eat the seeds in the winter. So it's another plus for this plant. Shade tolerant, moist, well-drained soil. The height of 60 inches, there's just some that have really tall flower spikes. You can push these into sun. They will scorch if the soil doesn't stay moist. I just find if you give them the shade, the growing conditions they like, they truly are low maintenance. The University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum has a hosta glade. And the first time I went, I thought, well, how interesting could that be? It was very interesting. All the different shades of green, the blue green, the variegation. And it was underneath, it was in the shade of sugar maples that they tap for maple syrup. So hostas, low maintenance if they're sited correctly. Lavender, the key to growing lavender, if you're in the north, especially, is full sun, well-drained soil. I once met a landscape maintenance person who said she never gives up on a plant until she's killed it 3 times. Now, this is someone getting paid to maintain the plants. So it took me a while to find the best spot for lavender in my city lot. I had heavy soil, but I had amended it, so I had good drainage. And I finally found a spot that was a slight slope um, facing west, got full sun, the soil drained very quickly, and it did well. Now I'm in sand country, and guess what? Lavender grows great for me. Hidcote and Munstead are the hardiest. Phenomenal. I've had good reports. Mine doesn't look like it made it through this winter, but the Hidcote and Munstead did. Phenomenal is phenomenal. It's not an English lavender, but it grows in just a year to like a 2 foot diameter plant. So it's amazing. So lavender, wonderful fragrant foliage, beautiful flowers that the hummingbirds enjoy and you can dry. This is another one of my favorite plants. Well, all of these I like, but Agastache, Agastache, whoever you talk to is going to have a different pronunciation, sometimes called Anise hyssop, hummingbird mint. The native variety grows about 3 feet tall, is drought tolerant, blooms for several months in the summer. Not only hummingbirds, but a variety of butterflies and bees. I have a planting of this in my no maintenance garden, my ode to my friend Roy. And I was out trying to get some pictures and video of the bees and the butterflies, and they just ignored me. They were all about nectaring. I didn't get any hummingbirds on that visit, but this is a great plant. It will reseed. Sometimes the mother plant may die out. I don't find it seeding obnoxiously. There are some sterile varieties, but I would stick with those that do produce some nice nectar. Garden phlox, there's the woodland phlox that is blooms earlier in the season, will take some shade, usually see along the woodland edge periwinkle blue flowers, not to be mistaken for Dame's rocket. Phlox have 5 petals. Dame's rocket, which is invasive, has 4. Garden phlox grows 3 feet tall, tends to get powdery mildew, so you'll want to look for varieties that are mildew resistant. And I put a link to the Chicago Botanic Plant Evaluation study. Every year they'll plant different perennials and review them for several years and put together a list of how they grow, flower, and any disease resistance. So that's a useful tool, though there are lots of newer varieties that aren't on that list. Many are fragrant, Deadheading will extend the bloom time. Look for mildew-resistant varieties, or in the spring, thin out the stems by 1/4 to allow better airflow. Make sure it's in full sun. And you can plant something a little shorter in front to block the mildewed leaves. It will come back the next year. It just doesn't look as pretty when the leaves have mildew. Bee balm is another powdery mildew susceptible plant. So same thing, thinning out the stems in the spring, planting something to mask the view, or looking for mildew-resistant varieties. Bee balm, as the name implies, is a great bee plant, but also butterflies and hummingbirds. It does reseed and the clumps will get bigger, so a couple plants go a long way. So I think, though, it's like aromatherapy when you're thinning it out or moving those seedlings to a new location, because they have that minty fragrance as you dig and divide them. I'm not going to say a lot about milkweeds. We talk so much about them with other pollinators, but you may be surprised to find that hummingbirds like the nectar on milkweed as well. My two favorite for those of us in the north that are clumpers and pretty easy to grow. Swamp milkweed, also called red milkweed, grows 4 to 5 feet tall, fragrant pink flowers, tolerates wet soil, and even once established dry. So it's often used in rain gardens. On the right is the orange butterfly weed, full sun, good drainage, critical, late to emerge. So be patient. Watch for it. It's too easy to dig up. So you might even want some people plant bulbs around it or put a stake or something to mark its location so you don't accidentally weed it out. There's a link in your handout to the Cersei Society that talks about all the different native milkweeds and where they're native to different areas in the country in North America. Liatris gay feather, great cut flower, tall vertical accent. It's in the same family as asters and sunflowers, believe it or not. You'll find butterflies nectaring on this. Monarchs love this plant, and hummingbirds. I like to leave the flowers form seed pods for the winter. They're kind of fluffy, and I think that's ornamental, and the songbirds will eat the seeds. So if you're looking for vertical interest, anywhere from 2 or 3 feet tall to 6 feet tall, moist, well-drained soil. Some are a little more tolerant of moisture conditions, but once established, will tolerate fairly dry soil. Red hot poker, not native here. I'm seeing some new introductions coming about. Zone 5 hardy. This is one I find, though, good drainage and full sun really help with hardiness. If your soil's heavy or clay, it may not be as long lived in your area, but I find where it's getting good sunlight and good drainage, it tends to come back year after year and be a little more reliably hardy. You can find all orange, all yellow. We're seeing lots of introductions. Some are only hardy to zone 6. Check out Walter's Gardens. They've been introducing some of late. But nice vertical interest, kind of a cool looking plant, right? Something different, combines nicely with your purples and grasses as well. Our native hardy hibiscus, swamp hibiscus, it's sometimes called, it tolerates moist, even sometimes occasionally wet soil. There's a lot of breeding to bring them down in size to more like 3 feet tall and wide. The species can get up to 5 feet tall, tolerates that moist soil, big dinner plate size blooms, dies back in the winter, slow to emerge, just like your butterfly weed. I leave the stems on both of those plants all winter. And then in the spring, if I get out there early, I leave at least 6 inches on this plant. And I usually leave the stems of my butterfly weed just to remind me they're there so I don't accidentally dig them up thinking it was some other plant that died. But beautiful blooms, you'll find some with bronzy leaves. There's cookie and cream with kind of a, and there's white blooms and red blooms and pink blooms. So lots of variety out there. When I think of foxglove, I also think of hollyhocks. I also think of my grandmother. She always had hollyhocks, biennial or short-lived perennial, much like foxglove. Tall vertical accent. When I was little, we'd make hollyhock dolls. But you'll see a lot of pollinators visiting the blooms. You'll also see weevils. That's what's causing some of the holes in the leaves. You might see orange spots from rust disease. Um, it's one of those that it's biennial, so you want to let it reseed, plant it 2 years in a row so that you'll have plenty of seeds and blooms every year. It's pretty difficult to control the rust disease. Full sun, make sure it has good airflow. And then again, this might be one you just put a grass in front, a short growing grass in front to mask the damaged leaves. It will survive the rust. Um, and fungicides, there's a very few that will take care of the rust disease because it's an internal disease and you don't want to spray, right? We're trying to bring the hummingbirds in. So full sun, good airflow, mask the damage if it does occur. Cardinal flower, this is one that I don't always have success. When I speak about this plant, I always do a survey. Who has good luck? There's always about a dozen people that have it reseeding, taking over. It's too vigorous for them. And the rest of us are going, well, we're trying to keep it alive. It can be short-lived. So when I talk about short-lived, means it doesn't come back for many years. It might be 3 or 5. It can reseed, as I mentioned. So you want to be sure to watch out for those seedlings. Full sun, fairly shade tolerant, moist, well drained to even wet soils. I've seen these growing in sort of more boggy kind of situations. Hummingbirds love it. Great vertical accent. Don't be discouraged. Keep trying to find the right spot or try the great blue lobelia. It's also a favorite of hummingbirds, and I find it much easier. Full sun to part shade, it will colonize if it's happy where it's growing, but not obnoxiously. You can keep it under control. I just find this one much easier. I have greater success. So if you're like me and cardinal flower is a tough one for you, try the great blue lobelia or just keep trying that cardinal flower because I finally found the spot at my house in Milwaukee. Then I moved and I haven't tried here because I tend to be a little drier soil wise. Ending the garden season with turtle head, a great rain garden plant. It takes shade, it takes moist to wet soils, late summer into fall bloomer. So excellent to help those hummingbirds and pollinators looking for a late season source of nectar. Hot lips, which this probably is a shorter, bright pink variety. Our native turtle head is 3 feet tall and has white blooms, but benefit shade tolerant. It will take full sun, moist tolerant, and great for rain gardens as well. I put sedum because I think of sedum as a fall bloomer, but a lot of you may be growing ground cover sedums that bloom in the summer and full sun, well-drained soil for best results. I've seen them pushed into shade. They can get a little leggy and maybe not bloom as well, and can get floppy if they're the upright type. But sedums are great pollinator plants, good, best in full sun and well drained to dry soil. If your plant flops, if you have autumn joy or one of the late season blooming upright forms, cut it back halfway when it's 8 inches tall. That'll promote more compact growth. Smaller blooms, but more of them. And again, if you can, grow it in the right conditions, less of a problem. Just a couple annuals and we'll finish up here in a few minutes. Mandevilla dipladenia, they are very popular and I love these plants. Wind tolerant, sun tolerant, drought tolerant, free flowering. They bloom all summer, no deadheading needed. There are vining types that you can train up an obelisk. You can let them hang in a hanging basket. And there are upright ones that only grow maybe a foot, foot and a half or 2 feet tall. Yellow, red, pink. There's a new one out of Suntory that's blue that fades to pink. So there's a lot of variety out there. And the hummingbirds love this plant, but it's easy, easy care and tolerates those tough conditions. Dipladenia used to be the ones with the shiny leaves, but then the taxonomist said they're all mandevillas. But I see them labeled both ways at garden centers. Morning glory planted if you want a lot of them for a long time to come. Morning glories reseed readily. Related, the field bindweed, which has a similar flower that's more of a white or a pale lavender, is that terrible weed. I planted Grandpa Morning Glory 15 years ago, and I'm still weeding out the unwanted plants. So use it with care. Um, also, if you want to grow one and you want the blooms, which is why you're growing it for hummingbirds, early call, heavenly blue, they tend to form flowers early. Many of the morning glories, for those of us in the north, are late bloomers. And so we're just looking at the leaves, wondering why we bothered to plant it. A relative of morning glory, cardinal climber, is not as vigorous. I've seen reports in warmer areas where it will reseed. I'm in the north. I usually grow this in a pot on my patio and love to watch the hummingbirds come and visit. Again, there's a link to an article by Susan Marr from UW-Madison on some of the interesting things about this plant. Um, in terms of full sun, we'll take a little shade, best bloom in full sun, great in a container trained on an obelisk. It can get fairly tall, especially in milder climates, but I usually find, it's only a few feet tall for me, and I get lots of blooms for the hummingbirds to enjoy. Our native coral honeysuckle vine, not invasive, it's our native honeysuckle vine, native to North America. I like Major Wheeler with dark red flowers. Mine's blooming like crazy and it blooms all summer long, tends to resist mildew. Very seldom do I see aphids, but when I do, the hummingbirds feed on them because I have my feeder by my lilac and my honeysuckle vine. So they'll nectar a little from the feeder. They'll go over to the honeysuckle and I'll see them on those flowers. I'll see them munch on any aphids they find. So it's a great vine. Full sun, it will take some shade. Heavier shade, more likely to have powdery mildew. So keep that in mind. Aphids and powdery mildew can be a problem on the native species. I find it less of an issue on Major Wheeler, that cultivar. Nice vine, blooms long, great plant. Trumpet vine, a great hummingbird plant. You almost always see a trumpet vine flower with a hummingbird, but it is aggressive. It is native, but it is very aggressive. And not only does the vine get big, but it sends up runners all over. So you can find suckers growing or runners coming up 15 feet from the parent plant. Big plant, late to bloom. So it takes it a few years to become mature before it will start flowering. Avoid over fertilization. If you ever drive down Highway 65 or other freeways by old farm fields, you'll see this often growing along a fence line, blooming, very neglected. Nobody's fertilizing. The plants are blooming like crazy. So avoid high nitrogen fertilizer. Some people root prune. I always am a little nervous because you don't want to overdo it to try to take out some of the roots because they're luxury feeders. They will seek out the nutrients they want, grow bigger with fewer flowers. Just a couple summer blooming shrubs. We're almost done here. Clethra, summer bloomer, full sun, part shade, moist to even wet soil. Fragrant summer flowers, fall color is yellow. You'll find sizes from anywhere from 3 to 5 feet tall. So a nice shrub. And you can kind of see some of I think it's also called pepper bush, because you can see some of the seed pods kind of look like peppercorns. I like Itea, Virginia Sweet Spire, another one that you can find at a couple feet tall to 4 or 5 feet tall. Fragrant white flowers, a hummingbirds like in the summer, and beautiful red fall color. It likes slightly acidic soil, but I've grown it in alkaline soil. It just tends to be a little slower, not as vigorous of a grower. It will send out suckers. I'm finding mine getting a little bit bigger in diameter, but not obnoxiously. And the fall color is great. And I put this with other hummingbird favorites. So I've got kind of my columbine coming in the spring. I've got my salvia. I've got my Fothergillas. I've got my Itea. So I try to have something in every garden every season. One for me to enjoy, and two for the hummingbirds. If you want something big for the shade, bottle brush buckeye. This is a great shade tolerant shrub and it's big, 12 feet or more tall and wide. Summer bloomer. I'm in the north. I occasionally get some seeds, but not often. The further south, the longer your growing season, the more likely you are to get those buckeye seeds. But a wonderful plant. And the nice part is it's shade tolerant, nice on a woodland edge, nice backdrop for a shade garden. Rose of Sharon, late summer, fall bloomer. I've lost a few Rose of Sharon. We planted some at the State Fair Garden. A couple in a more sheltered area survived. Some of them that were a little bit closer to the kind of the roadway next to our garden didn't make it. I lost a couple here in my garden that I planted last year. And I find that with Rose of Sharon, it seems like every so often we have a winter they don't survive. We had dry winter, open, no sun. We had lots of rain early last spring, followed by a dry fall and winter. And I think a lot of plants, even some of my natives, couldn't tolerate it. But Rose of Sharon in the hibiscus family, a lot of the new varieties don't reseed readily. If you have an older one, you know they can seed and become this giant colony, which is very discouraging to some people. So look for some of those newer varieties that are out that tend not to reseed readily, but still have beautiful blooms late summer into fall. Just a couple tips on feeders. Feeders are a great way to bring them in, especially in the spring when we don't have a lot of food source, or fall when they're heading down south. Kind of watch. You can go to websites to find where the hummingbirds are and get your hummingbirds out, before you expect them, just so that you're ready. And if you have things blooming in the yard, that's even better. Keep them up a couple weeks after you see your last hummingbird because you might have some migrating through, and some of those that are later may be injured or weaker or young. So having food out a couple weeks after your regular residents have gone on is a good thing to help those. Keeping feeders clean is important. So if you're not able to keep it clean, stick with the plants. There's nothing wrong with that. Be realistic. And I have to show you, this is unbelievable. This is not what happens at my hummingbird feeder. The only place I've seen this was in Costa Rica with a variety of hummingbirds at a nature center. Hummingbirds are very territorial. So if you've got a couple feeders, try to keep them, like 15 feet apart. I have two in the front, about 15 feet apart, one in the back of the house. I know we have two regular hummingbirds, maybe three, and they're always fighting over the nectar. I was doing a bit of reading, and one source was, I think, all about birds suggested that you get a feeder with just one port. And then if you have several of them with one port, you're more likely, there's less territorial combating, I guess. I don't know. It just seems maybe that's my next step because these guys do go after each other and there's plenty of food, right? Use a mixture of 1 part sugar and 4 parts water. No reason to make it any um, stronger for them. Sometimes I've read that spring or fall migration, but I just stick to the 1 part sugar. You don't need to buy the pre-done mixes. It's just sugar and water that you use. And then don't use food coloring. Have your feeder provide the color, whether it's the base that's red or here, it's a nice red. I have a piece of garden art that has an orange globe, and I need to probably put it inside my porch because they're always going after it until they realize there's no food there. And then water, a shallow bird bath. One of the things I get to do is I work with Birds in Bloom, and I was reviewing pictures, anything with a plant in it or about a plant they send to me to look at. And somebody took a picture of a hummingbird sipping water out of a bird bath next to a bee because the shallow sloping sides allowed the bee as well as the hummingbird to sit there and lap up water without taking a bath. And if you have a mister, they're even happier. Again, I want to thank We Energies for sponsoring our library program. All our past webinars are still available for you to watch, as well as the activities that you might enjoy taking part in. Thanks to Kelly and her team at Milwaukee Public Library for hosting. They are great. Our libraries are important parts of our community. Thanks to the libraries and librarians in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and those throughout Wisconsin. I've met a few of you, and I'm very grateful for all you have done to help us reach out to gardeners all over the country, and especially those in your community. We need to support our libraries. It's a great resource. It's not just a bunch of shelves with books. Librarians are a great source of information, literacy programs, educational programs, so much more. So I want to thank all of them for all they do to help their communities. I do have a couple events if you're in Southeast Wisconsin or anywhere near Ebert's Greenhouse Village. This Sunday, I'm talking selecting the right hydrangea for your landscape, and there are many to choose from. And then the next week, I'll be doing houseplants. But we keep getting new events added, so visit my website. Past webinars, not just those from the library series, I house either on my website or there's always links if it's housed on the Milwaukee Public Library YouTube channel. So always a way to get there. And the handouts as well, as you know, they're pretty detailed because there's no page limit. So I love to give you lots of links and information. I like to end every talk, help me grow, gardener. Someone inspired you. This is my little grandson, Santi, who's now 5.5, who does like to garden. I had to buy him his own gloves, and he has his Corona wheelbarrow, but he loves to plant and take care of the plants. Somebody inspired you, whether it's a young adult just learning to garden, whether it's a new retiree, a young family, or a youngster. Share your love and your knowledge. The more we garden, the happier and the kinder, gentler world we can create. As I mentioned, all the Create Your Own Outdoor Paradise information is still available on my website. You'll see this on the homepage. Click it, it'll get you to all the other information, the activities, links to the webinars. I know I'm way behind on my emails, but bear with me. But I do post on Facebook about every day. And so I try to keep you posted and do a monthly newsletter as well. So now back to Kelly and to you. Sorry, I was aiming for an hour. So I appreciate those of you who have stayed with me for the whole time. Again, your handout has lots of details, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Melinda. We're close enough to an hour, so all
Okay, I
good.
like the way we'll round
Yes.
down.
I do want to put a little plug in also for Milwaukee Public Library. Three branches have seed libraries. So
Ooh.
if you are in the area, check out East Branch, Zablocki Branch, and Tippecanoe Branch Library. They do have seed libraries, newly refreshed for this year. And if you're not in the area, check out your local library and see if they might have something as
I have
well.
been to, yeah, I have been to several in different states as well that are doing the same thing, trying to get us all gardening. So thanks for mentioning that, Kelly.
Absolutely. All right, so let's dive into our questions. And just a reminder, if you have a question for Melinda, please put that in the Q&A box. There's a button on the bottom of your screen, so we're just going to go through them here. And then, of course, we are recording recording this webinar, and we'll be sending that along with the handout as well in a few days. So, all right. So our first question is from Deborah. Deborah says, I'm having a terrible time with my Siberian and bearded irises to flower. I think they're planted shallow enough, but I have clay-ish soil and seem to sink over the winter. Any cutting back or fertilization schedule I should be doing or any other tips? And this is my third spring, hoping and waiting for blooms and only have a few.
Great question. So Iris, so it sounds like you're on the right track. The rhizomes like to be very shallow of the bearded iris. And so they are just barely below the soil surface. Um, Full sun for the best bloom. If they get overcrowded, which doesn't sound like it's a problem if these are just 3 years old, once they get overcrowded, they tend to not bloom as well. The other problem I've seen occasionally on bearded iris, especially the early bloomers, they start to send up their flower stem. We get a cold snap, and those buds, as they're just starting to break open, they're not as hardy and they're more susceptible to damage. And so I've even seen in some years where they're just coming out of the ground and that flower stem was killed. So, kind of monitoring the weather, full sun. It sounds like you're working on amending your soil, making sure you have good drainage. Siberian iris are much more tolerant, I find, of our heavier soils and moister soils. Um, Typically, more of a fibrous root system. And so those are planted even so the crown where the leaves join the roots, that's even with the soil surface. Um, Anything you can do. So when we amend our soil, we add compost is a great thing to amend. Work it in not just the planting hole, but beyond. So if you've got an area you're going to plant iris, if you could amend that whole area, that's a great thing to do. One of the things I like to do with, especially in heavier soils, is top dressing with compost is a great way to fertilize your perennials. That for some, that's all you need to do. So every other year, put an inch or two of compost over the soil surface. Then take an auger bit and drill in, like one that maybe you would do to plant your bulbs, small bulbs, and that aerates the soil, but it also pushes some of that compost into the root zone. Now, if you don't have access to a lot of compost, kind of typical, then you could just kind of aerate the soil, but then fill that hole with compost. So it's called vertical mulching, and that may help over time improve. The other thing is sometimes it's just moving plants to a new location. I was at Berner Botanical Gardens, this was years ago, and they had clematis along their shade structure. It was on the outside in the sun. And they told me that sometimes their clematis wouldn't do well. They just move them over a couple of feet, and for some reason that seemed to do the trick. So whether the soil was a little bit different there, the light conditions were different. So sometimes it may be just a matter of finding a better spot. I'm surprised you're having problems with your Siberian iris, but if your soil's really heavy, you may want to take a break from those or grow them in containers sunk in the ground where you have better soil until you can amend that soil in the area, that whole planting bed.
Thanks, Melinda. And everyone, I just added the link to the handout again in the chat. We'll be sending that out again with a follow-up email as well if you haven't gotten that. All right, our next question is from Jim. Jim is asking, can you pot a canna in a garden pond?
Yes, you can. And I don't think I have it on this one, but I can send the link. It was on my, yes, cannas work very well. So Tesla, not Tesla, I'm thinking of the light guy, Tesla, who introduced Tropicana. If you go to the Tropicana Canna website, or I will send the link to Kelly to include with the handout, they have great information on how to do this. So typically what you'll do is often will, if you're planting the canna rhizome yourself, plant it in a water garden potting mix, cover the top. You either do it in a regular pot or a water garden plant pot that has a lot of sides. You may want to use landscape fabric that'll let the water through but hold the soil in place. Cover it with gravel so that it doesn't float out, right, into the water and cloud up the water, and it holds that soil. But cannas are great in water gardens. So I'm glad you brought that up. Very cool addition. So yes. And then one of the other things you can do is just leave it in the regular potting mix, set it in a container without drainage holes, and then just keep water in the bottom of that. So if you tend to travel a lot, it's a great way to grow elephant ears and cannas because you can grow it, hydroponically, so to speak. Just make sure some water in the bottom of that container, and it'll pull up the moisture. And then you don't care if some of the soil gets out into the water because your pot will cover it. But it's a great way to grow cannas. But yes. I will get you that. I'm making a note to remind me to send that link to Kelly because they go through if you want to do, getting the soil off, replanting it, introducing it into the water garden if you're buying transplants. But it's a great way to grow cannas. Thanks for asking.
Next question here from Linda. Linda's asking, are there plants that should be avoided planting near or not planted in combination? Should planting by certain trees be avoided? And can plantings be near the house?
Good question. Okay. So I'm a, trees are our permanent, hopefully, part of our landscape, right? So we don't want to damage them. So I'm so glad you asked that question. So perennial ground covers are good choices. Things like hostas, things like astilbe, things like lungwort, things like fringe bleeding heart, things that you plant in the ground and leave there for years to come. Don't till up the soil because the majority of your tree roots are in the top 12 to 18 inches of soil. Instead, you're going to try to plant between major roots. You could add a little compost to the planting hole. You could mulch the soil surface. Mulch or perennial ground covers are much better than grass growing around and under our trees. Um, if you want annuals under your trees, one way to do it without damaging is pot them up and set them in your perennial ground cover. So you have this vertical interest. Hostas in a container above ground look pretty cool. Or take a nursery pot, something you bought a shrub in, or a big perennial, bury that, a couple of those in the area under the tree so it's flush with the ground. Then pot up your annual in a slightly smaller container and set it inside that buried pot. You're only disturbing the roots once because you set the pot in the other pot. It keeps the soil moist so you don't have to water it. And you could change it out. So you could have some pansies in the spring and patience in the summer, and then end up, with some more pansies in the fall. So that's another way to do it. Um, I'm glad you brought up about combining plants. You want to make sure they're equally assertive. So if you put bee balm in a garden with, say, I'm trying to think of something that's less aggressive. Woodland phlox would be in a different spot. But bee balm will just take over a garden quickly. Liatris can you, if it's happy, it will reproduce well. We've had some problems trying to get it established at our state fair garden. But bee balm with, say, butterfly weed might be a problem if your butterfly weed is just struggling to stay intact. So avoiding those plants that are overly vigorous with those that tend to be more timid. Those are kind of the things. Near a house, I have plants close to my foundation, but that does mean that, there's bugs out there, but they're good guys, ground beetles helping to break down mulch. Some people prefer to have a barrier of landscape fabric and stone. Just keep in mind, weeds can go through the stone into the fabric and feel that that keeps some of the bugs out of their house. Make sure your foundation is well sealed so that that's not an issue. From a tick standpoint, you want to make sure that your gardens are managed around your house. For ticks, like tall grasses, they like weedy gardens, they like invasive plants, barberry and honeysuckle. They like areas where the mice and the deer and kind of go through your garden. So anytime you can keep them away, that's a good option as well. So I think that might be what you're thinking. From a fire standpoint, if we have any of you that are in an area that is subject to wildfires with what's happening in Canada, a good reminder that we should all be careful. There's a lot of information coming out of the West Coast, the University of California, Idaho, I think it is, Arizona. Um, there's a lot more fire safe planting information. Uh, University of North Carolina also talks about plants that tend to be more fire resistant. And so there's a lot of work, especially on the West Coast, where wildfires have been more prevalent, but we're seeing them everywhere now, about having a fire-free zone, plants you shouldn't have up against your house if you're concerned about that. And I know in northern Wisconsin, we had some problems with wildfires pretty much everywhere in the country. So great question. If that's a concern, you definitely want to look at that. They have zones that they talk about. Um, I will add that to my list of links. So fire safe landscaping, because I have come across several sites. Um, that's a whole area we really need to be aware of. So thank you for asking about that.
All right, our next question from Jill. Jill's wondering, is wild bergamot good for hummingbirds?
Yes, wild bergamot is a type of Monarda. So when you check out your handout, you'll find it's more of a pale purple. It is more shade tolerant as well. And it's another one that will kind of reseed and spread vigorously. I have an area by our pole barn that is kind of 3 feet where all the water comes off the roof and drains down in. And I'm just trying to let my bee balm and my rudbeckia and some palm sedge, just kind of fight it out and take over that area and try to keep the weeds down by the plants that tend to be equally aggressive. So thank you for bringing that up. It is a type of Monarda. There is information on your handout. And yes, both the Monarda's didyma and the bergamot are both great hummingbird plants. Thanks for asking.
Some more plants here from Barb. Barb's wondering, what about hydrangeas, spiderwort, and gooseneck loosestrife? Are they attractive to hummers? Thank you.
Um, uh, According to the breeders of hydrangeas, yes. So I wouldn't put them as my top hummingbird plants. Uh, Probably the best hummingbird plants for pollinators in general and hummingbirds is the oak leaf, which is native to Southeast United States. Most are hardy up to zone 5, maybe some in zone 4. Beautiful hydrangeas. They bloom on old wood, so they set their flower buds the year before, have great fall color, big, bold leaves that look like the shape of oak leaves. Um, um, what, one of the other, what were the other ones? Sorry, Kelly. I had a brain here.
Yeah, sorry
Um,
about that. Let me see here.
Sorry.
Hydrangea, spiderwort, and
Oh, spiderwort
gooseneck
and gooseneck
loosestrife.
loosestrife.
Yeah.
Um, I haven't seen gooseneck loosestrife listed. There are a lot of plants that I kind of every year I feel like I learn something new, like flowering maple. I bought it because I love the plant. I think it's cool. And then I found out it's a hummingbird plant, so I can't wait to see if they're attracted. Um, Spiderwort probably is. This shows my bias. It's not one of my favorite plants, but it is a great hummingbird plant and it's native. And it's got long, strappy leaves and blue flowers, kind of in a triangular shape. So, again, not listed as one of their favorites, but both of those plants, gooseneck loosestrife, can be a little vigorous, not invasive, but vigorous. So, plant it with care. You know, I plant a lot of cultivated and a lot of native plants. I plant things for the hummingbirds, the bees, and the butterflies, and some things just for me. I have a lot of hydrangeas because they're very low maintenance and it fits and fills the space and makes a nice backdrop for my perennials and annuals. So, you know, I haven't noticed them being good hummingbird on list or in my garden. So, kind of watch out and let us know what you see.
A question from Denise. Denise is wondering basically how to keep Orioles off of hummingbird feeders. They said there are orange slices out for the Orioles and bird water for them. If there's maybe a way to divert them from the hummingbird feeders, what would that be?
I'm laughing because I'm with an electrical engineer. So that means if it's technology, it's great. So we have a bird feeder with a camera, which has been very fun. And he found out about a hummingbird feeder with a camera. And the only ones visiting it are the Baltimore Orioles. The hummingbirds have not gone to it. And so we see the Baltimore Orioles. I'm not sure there's a good way to keep them. I have feeders too. I have Baltimore or I have jelly, which a lot of birds are eating. I have oranges as well. And so I think it's just one of those things that you're good. Hopefully, they're not scaring away the hummingbirds. Somebody asked, I noticed in the chat about, is there placement suggestions for the feeders? A sheltered location, a little bit of shade is good because the sugar water will last longer. Maybe making sure you keep your hummingbird feeder away from your Baltimore Oriole feeders. Um, I haven't seen the Baltimore Orioles scare away the hummingbirds from my feeders, but I have seen them at that one feeder, especially, and the others as well. But I usually see them more at the oranges and the grape jelly. But like I said, they pollinate a lot of the same plants, hummingbirds, the trees and things. They're messy. They call them accidental pollinators. They're just after the nectar and they're so messy. That's how they pollinate. So I don't know of any way to prevent them from doing that because they can get their beaks are fairly long and they can get them into those the feeder sprouts pretty easily. So I think just keeping your feeders separated might be one way. And then eventually, hopefully, they'll kind of lose interest, hopefully. I don't know. I haven't seen any way to keep them apart. If someone has a suggestion, I'd love to hear it.
Got kind of a related question from Kylie. Kylie's asking how to keep bees away from the hummingbird feeder. Should I paint the yellow flowers red? That make a difference?
Yeah, that probably wouldn't hurt. Bees are attracted to the sugar water. Usually their tongues are not long enough to get to that, but it sure wouldn't hurt to have red flowers instead of yellow. Bees are more ultraviolet, yellows, some blues and lavenders are more attractive to them. So that might be an issue. I find some dead ones in my hummingbird feeders where they go into, but not to the point where they're keeping the hummingbirds away. So I think that's worth a try to paint them a different color and see if that kind of discourages them. That usually it's you'll see a few, but usually I haven't found it to be a problem. I think putting it in a shady location might be another thing. Bees like that warm sunshine, and the hummingbirds, they'll be in the tree, they'll be in the shade, and then maybe putting your hummingbird feeder in a little more shaded location might discourage bees who are looking for a warmer site to feed.
Mhm. Our next question is from Joy. Joy's wondering, what is the name again of the garden in Chicago that you mentioned? I believe you were speaking about hostas.
Well, there were two gardens. So Lurie Gardens at Millennial Park is in Chicago, and that has native and cultivated plants designed by Pete, Piet Udolph, a, a designer out of Europe who's done the High Line. He did this great garden in Detroit that I was lucky enough. Oh, I saw it in the winter. I got to go back to see it in the summer. He did the Lurie Garden. He works a lot with Roy Diblick, and that's a small garden that had the salvia. It has wild quinine, rattlesnake master, the alliums. The garden with the hostas was the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, located in Chanhassen, Minnesota, west of the Twin Cities. Great, great arboretum. They have display gardens around the education center. They have large collections. You can drive your car and park to see the ornamental grasses, to see the crab apples, to see different collections of plants. Um, Very good garden. Chicago Botanic Garden is an excellent, there's so many wonderful gardens. We have a friend joining us from Georgia. Atlanta Botanical Garden is great. I was down there when they had the Chihuly exhibit in the gardens, was amazing. St. Louis. So, and Lady Bird Johnson and Dallas Botanic Gardens and Arboretum in Texas. So lots of cool ones. I like to, if I'm traveling, try to go to a botanic garden or arboretum in the area. You can learn so much, even in the winter, which is a lot of times when I see them. What looks beautiful in the winter, what's doing well, always something to learn. So thanks for asking.
So I know we talked a little bit about placement for hummingbird feeders. Jamie has a question about a different kind of feeder. So they have a blue glass feeder on their brick house and have never seen any birds using it. Um, any suggestions for placement or even if the blue glass plays a role in that?
I've seen those. I've had one and didn't have a lot of success. It's kind of a circle, kind of looked like a donut, a big donut, and very pretty. So a couple things with when we're doing feeders for birds, we want them either within 3 feet of our house or more than 30 to avoid collisions with the windows. Um, I used to keep all my bird feeders in a garden with low growers so that predators couldn't get at the birds. My cats always lived in the house when I had cats, but there are some feral cats in the neighborhood who I chase out of the garden whenever I see them. Now I moved them out away further from the house because the turkeys were going after my feeder, the feed, and destroying my garden. Um, so I might try a different location. If it's up against the house, that may be hard for them to get at that, or they may not get that it's a feeder. Um, Usually in a sunny location, usually again, I would just try moving it to a different spot. You may want to try a different kind of feeder. I did there, depending on the birds you're trying to attract. I'll be honest, I'm kind of lazy. I buy these cylinders. They're kind of expensive, compressed bird seed, and I get the bugs, nuts, and berries because it brings in the bluebirds. Yes, I get some jays, but the cardinals like it. And it's on this wire form that I just slide over a post. It hangs down. They have room to grasp on the edge and feed. And I found I've had good luck with that. Easier to clean. Tube feeders are great for finches and things. I think the blue glass feeders were more of a decorative item. Sometimes they're not always as appealing to our birds as some of the more functional ones. So you might want to try, if you want it that close to the house, maybe try swapping it out. Maybe plant it instead or use it as an ornamental addition, a garden art, and replace it with a feeder that is more likely to attract birds, whether it's one of the cylinder, whether it's one of the covered types that has a little shelf that they can stand on and eat the seeds. I would try that instead. A platform with a roof on it will get you also some different kind of birds attracted to it. And I might have a good link to different seeds. Actually, Milorganite blog, I will send a link to that. And it talks about the different feeders and the different bird food um, for attracting. And I think you just need a different bird feeder, but don't give it up. Put it somewhere else. Maybe plant something in it or use it for garden art.
Question from Terry. Terry is wondering if you could share the name of the variety of the red salvia that you showed pictured at your friend's house that she was able to carry over from year to year.
Okay, red Roman. It's a salvia. It's a anise, Anise, salvia gargantica, which is in your handout. She's not the one. This is Dawn who works with me. I think that's at her lake house. That's red Roman. Um, the woman, my friend Annis, who is the horticulturist at Eau Claire Country Golf and Country Club, she overwinters black and blue salvia, which is another type of Annis salvia, but it has blue flowers with black sepals. And then what she does is she buries that plant at the end of the season, buries it in the ground, and then piles leaves and other plant debris on top and digs it out in the spring. If you're in a zone 7, you probably it would live outside. I have dug up I want to every year, I keep meaning to just mulch the rhizomes. They form these kind of tuberous roots actually, and just mulch heavy to see if that would keep them alive to come back. So that'd be a way. You have nothing to lose, right? It's going to die for sure if you're in a cold area. So you might as well give it a try. But the red one was red Roman. I find all the Anna salvias, Salvia gargantica, and that's on your handout, really are good at attracting the hummingbirds.
Next question is from, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Keisha. I have a zinnia that I've been waiting to plant. Unfortunately, we've had the massive hailstorm and I had to wait for
Oh,
a roof to be redone. It is from seed. I planted indoors. So is it too late for me to plant like outside?
I'm guessing you might be in Wisconsin because we had some bad hail. And or if you're in the Midwest or North, no, you're not. This crazy spring, we had a couple of those warm days, and everybody feels like they're late. If you looked at my garage, my patio, and my front porch, you would know you're not late. I've had temperatures in the 30s at night. I've been bringing my basil and my coleus and impatiens in and then back out. My tomatoes didn't go out until recently to be, out. So you're not zinnias that even if they're kind of struggling by the time you get them out, make sure you harden them off, get them gradually used to the outdoors, a little bit more sun every day. And then water them the first few weeks. You're going to have to give them a little more TLC, gradually reduce the frequency, but you're not too late. Even if you're down south, they're heat and drought tolerant. So that's a good one for our southern garden friends to grow as well. So it's a great plant. You'll get great blooms and good job starting it from seed indoors. It's a fun one to grow. And yes, you're okay. It's just been a crazy spring for everybody.
So, I know earlier we were talking about irises, and Lisa's got a question about irises. When is the right time to move irises? Can they be moved before they bloom, or do I wait until after they're done? They're in a shaded area and are not doing anything yet.
Usually we like to wait 6 to 8 weeks after they flower or should have flowered to move them. I have moved them just before the ground froze, knowing I was taking a chance that they might not make it. And, sometimes if August is really hot, it's a little stressful on the plant, but a lot of times early September is a good time when the heat is starting to fade a little bit for those of us in the more northern areas. I did have one iris enthusiast, a gentleman who's well known on the East Coast. He goes, I just dig mine whenever I want, and they do fine. And I do find gardeners, we do, if you know you're taking a chance, but you want to give them a chance to put the energy back into the rhizome after flowering. I think you're right, move them to a sunnier spot. I have moved mine at all different times because I was redoing a garden bed or they weren't doing well and had another plant for that spot. It may not come back to flower that next year, but then the following year you should have blooms. So if you can wait 6 weeks after it should have bloomed, great. If not, just give it some good TLC and you know, you'll have a better chance of success if you wait a little while.
From what I know, you said it's been quite a wild spring. I know certainly in
Yes.
Wisconsin, that's true. Jan is wondering, have you seen any growth on your hibiscus yet?
I haven't looked yet. So I did my butterfly weed that is up, but it's kind of next to this big black kettle in the front, and I think it had a lot of extra heat. That's on my list. I need to go look. Actually, I know I have some hibiscus in the back that aren't up yet, that haven't come back. So I have not seen any in my east garden. They're relatively young plants, so I have to go check the ones in the west. So hopefully soon. I'm not surprised. Yes. So Jan, hopefully, if you're seeing some, I'm going to go out there tomorrow. It'll be dark when we finish here, but I'm going to go out tomorrow and see if anything's looking good on the other more established bed, because those have been really reliable. The ones on the east side are new plants, and the last I looked a couple days ago, just dead stems back there. So nothing showing yet.
Got a follow-up clarification from Linda. So Linda was asking earlier about placement of hummingbird plants and
Right.
combination planting.
Oh,
Linda is wondering, do hummingbirds like or dislike certain trees or plant combinations? I transplanted some hosta under some trees and letting them naturally spread. As for plants in a combination, do hummingbirds not like certain plants, so I shouldn't plant a hummingbird favorite near them?
you know what? They'll seek out the plants they want. I have to tell you a funny story. So Kufi, I mentioned I always grow cigar plant, the Kufi ignea. And harden off a lot of my plants. I put them on carts in my garage, wheel them out for as long as they need, then increase it every day. And so the garage door was open. They were inside the garage, and there's a hummingbird on my Kufias. So they will seek out the plants that they want. You may not see them at certain hummingbird favorites, but it may be there's something they prefer or there's something easier access. So there may be um, a massive Weigela in bloom and they're going after that instead of coming over to something that's a single plant by itself. So they expend less energy. I had my red Roman salvia out during the day, in at night, and I put it out and they found it. I brought it in, as I mentioned, didn't put it out in time and they were looking for it. So they do have a memory. And I love when they look at us, right? And they know that, okay, just checking you out. So I wouldn't worry about scaring them away. They will find the plants. The more you put together, the easier it is for them to gather nectar, the less energy seeking it out, and the more likely you are to have them in your yard as well. Putting hummingbird favorite plants by your feeders is a good idea because that's another way to attract them. As I mentioned, I have a feeder by my kitchen window, and it's by my weeping lilac, and then my major wheeler honeysuckle vine is right next to that. And then I have a hosta underneath, and I have lots of hummingbird plants, but it'll be at the feeder, and then it'll nectar on some plants, come back. And so that's a great way to get them in as well.
All right, our next question is from Kate. Kate says, I've heard that royal catchfly is great for hummingbirds, but it wasn't mentioned. Is there something objectionable about using that one?
No. I just, you know what, there were a lot that I didn't mention. And so there's no problem growing it. So that's one I need to add to my list and add to my garden as well. Um, so yeah, as I mentioned, I covered a lot of plants, but there's more that aren't included. So no problem with it. It just didn't make it on the list. So thanks for adding that.
All right, next question from Gail. Um, and I'm wondering if I'm going to mispronounce this plant name, but Gail says, I love Hoichera, but they don't seem to love my garden. I've tried planting them in mostly shade, but they never seem to survive the winter. Could it be the soil, or would they do better with some more sun?
So coral bells, heuchera, is likes moist, well-drained soils. They're very subject to frost heaving. And I saw a lot of frost heaving in my garden this year. So frost heaving happens when we have the cold weather and the ground freezes, then we get a thaw, and then it shifts, freezing and thawing shifts, and it pushes certain plants. Daylilies can be kind of pushed up. The coral bells are one of those that are really notorious. Some coral bells really thrive in full sun, those with the thicker purple leaves. Um, the solid green leaves, those tend to be the most shade tolerant. So there is a point where there's too much shade. Clay, they'll tolerate to some extent, but again, I would try amending the soil. One of the coolest applications I saw of coral bells was on a garden tour in a suburb of Milwaukee years ago, and they did a tapestry of coral bells under their street tree. And they had all the different colors and shaped leaves. It was just beautiful. And it wasn't about the flowers, though. If you want hummingbirds, you want the blooms, but it was just gorgeous. So finding those, and then the Velosa type. If you're in an area that's really humid, the Velosa type have less of a problem with melting out or disappearing. I haven't had problems in the city or out where I'm out now losing my coral bells to that problem. But the humidity, if that's an issue, poor drainage, and then frost heaving. So I would try amending the soil with some compost, maybe giving it a bit more sunlight. It may just be getting too much shade. One of the things when I get asked about plants will grow in this place, I always say what's doing well and what isn't, because that gives us an indication of how much sun those plants are really getting and what the soil conditions. If this plant does well, then maybe that plant does well or that one won't if this one doesn't. You know what I mean? You kind of get used to, well, these plants all do well in this garden and they have these conditions and this is what they like. So I hopefully that will help you. Maybe move them a little more sunlight, amend the soil and see if that helps.
Right, got a interesting question from Barb. Barb says, this isn't exactly about hummingbirds, but I wonder if you know of a way to deter a Cooper's hawk from going after my songbirds at my feeders. He seems to have discovered my yard. Would putting CD discs out work, or would that scare away the birds as well?
You know, the bird people at Birds in Bloom always say, well, everybody needs to eat. I hear you. Hawks do like birds. Some people will use scarecrow or crow figurines and silhouettes because that doesn't tend to scare the birds, but it tends to scare the hawks. I live out in the country. The hawks uh, occasionally will go to the bird feeders, but boy, those birds really communicate well and know how to hide. Um, but the crows will gang up on the hawks and chase them out of the yard in the area. So I've heard some people will put crows silhouettes or, fake crows. I think you can buy stuffed crows to put out there, and that will help discourage that. They've had some success with that. I'm worried with like you that the CDs will scare away the birds. I was trying to keep the turkeys away, but I was afraid anything I did to keep the turkeys from the feeders would keep the birds, ribbons and things moving. So I think trying something like the silhouette of that's just one thing I've seen people say that they do to try to keep those hawks away. Sometimes taking your feeders down for a while so the hawks then go to a different hunting ground has been recommended by the bird experts at Birds in Bloom. But I always hate doing that because the birds will eventually come back, right? But it takes a while for them to come back. But that's one of their things when you have birds or hawks visiting your feeders that you don't want is temporarily taking them down to get those birds that you don't want to go elsewhere and then putting your feeders back up. Hopefully, the good birds that you want will find it and come back, and the others have found someplace else to go. So, those would be my two recommendations.
And also from Barb, we have a good suggestion for the question earlier about Orioles. Barb is saying you might want to put out grape jelly for the Orioles. They love it and might eat that rather than the hummingbird feeders.
Right. So, a lot of the feeders have the cups, and that's exactly what I do too. Grape jelly and the oranges. Somebody said they should have nutritious food, and I'm like, well, I'm sorry. They're going to have some grape jelly at my house too. So, thank you, Barb, for sharing that. That is a good suggestion. Give them more alternatives.
All right. Next question is from Cheryl. Cheryl's asking, are hummingbirds attracted to 4 o'clocks? The tubers of this flower can be wintered over indoors like a dahlia.
Yes. And I've even seen, yes, 4 o'clocks are very good. Some people say there's been some work claiming they're Japanese beetle trap plants. And then some people say no, but yes, they are. And I've seen them when I lived in the city of Milwaukee. My neighbor, a few houses down, had them right on the south side of their brick house in a very sheltered area because our houses were really close together. And theirs overwintered in the garden. But you're right. If they're not hardy in your area, like you said, you can dig them up. I was at the Realtors Home Show speaking, and there were bulb growers from the Netherlands. And of course, I couldn't resist selling, they called them the magic flower or something. They were 4 o'clocks and they were selling the tuberous roots. So, yes, very good hummingbird plants. Thank you. As you can see, I left off quite a few. There's so many to choose from. And this is great because taking pictures or making notes of the plants they like so that you know how to arrange them in your landscape so that you can keep those hummers in view is also important. So thank you guys for sharing those and good questions.
A question from Antoinette. Antoinette is wondering if you speak growing some items down south or northern areas, is that in relation to state lines or cities?
Okay. Thank you for state line. So thank you for that question. So one of the links on the handout in the beginning are hummingbird favorites for zones 8 and 9. And so I should clarify. So when I talk about the South, I usually think of our southern states, the Southeast, the Carolinas, Georgia. Florida's kind of, if there's anyone, I know somebody was visiting in Florida or traveling from Florida. I noticed on chat, I've been lucky enough to speak there. Um, even from northern to southern Florida is different. Texas is very different. So, kind of saying like the southern part of the country versus the Midwest versus the North being the Minnesota, the Great Lakes, the Dakotas, our friends in Canada. The Pacific Northwest is another microclimate as well. So, a lot of times you'll see plants that will do well there that aren't hardy. It's a different hardiness. And California is has tons of microclimate. So thank you for asking. I should have clarified better. So when I talk about the South, I talk usually some below the Midwest, below the Ohio, Kentucky, Illinois, Indiana kind of area.
Next question is from Claire. Claire's sharing, speaking of late breaking plans, so the spring being a little bit wonky with weather, do you have northern sea oak grass? And if so, has yours broken dormancy? I planted it last year and I'm worried it didn't survive the tough winter here in the Milwaukee region.
It is a very aggressive plant. I had it when I lived in the city of Milwaukee and it took over a whole little alley garden bed. So I've been reluctant. However, I heard it can crowd out garlic mustard. So I have an area I'm thinking maybe that's where it belongs. I it's a later bloomer, so I'm not surprised. I'm thinking about the grasses I'm finding coming up in my garden. My blue stem in some parts that are warmer is up, some parts not. So I would still give it some time. As I mentioned, we had an open, dry winter. We had a dry fall, a very wet early season here in the southern part of Wisconsin. So the plants got a lot of moisture early. The roots were near the surface. Then it got dry. And if you weren't able to water, even if you were, that's not as good as a good rain, thorough rain, and then the open winter. I wouldn't give up. I'm one of those people that waits. I have two St. John's wort Combs hypericum that I'm finally declaring dead and getting out of the garden, but they are 12 years old, been great and done. I have two in front that I just planted last year or 2 years ago, and they're fine. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting year. Start taking notes. I think we're going to have to make some decisions on what we plant, and how our seasons are so variable and extreme. So I wouldn't give up on it yet, Claire. I don't have any growing in my garden. I'm away from the city, so I know I'm later than a lot of people. My daughter is not too far from where she grew up, and so her garden is a lot further ahead than mine, just being in a more urban area, more sheltered location.
Yeah, I will say personally speaking as well, my milkweed seemed pretty slow to start
Okay.
emerging, so but it's finally
Yeah.
taking off. So um, all right. So, and just a final reminder to everyone, we did share the link in the chat for the handout if you need to access that. Otherwise, we'll be sending that in the follow-up email as well. So let's get to our question here from Linda. Linda is asking or sharing, my columbine didn't bloom this year. Any ideas as to why, since it's been prolific in past years?
If you've got the lead, so columbine can be short-lived. So what may have happened is the parent plant may have died, and what you're seeing are the seedlings. And I have to tell you, so I had this whole garden almost taken over with columbine. So I was doing some cleaning and planting and moving things around. And last year I didn't have very many columbine, and I was like, oh, I probably took out too many. And this year I have a lot. So a lot of those seedlings now reach maturity and are blooming. So from seed, the first year perennial puts on leaves, the second year leaves and flowers. When we buy a perennial in bloom at the garden center, they've pushed it so that it's already in its blooming stage. So you may have lost the parent plant. And if you've got seedlings, then the good news is you'll probably have lots of flowers next year. So those seedlings aren't mature enough to bloom this year, but will next year. So it could be, again, you may have lost the parent plant because it can be short-lived, but it does reseed readily. So if you did a little, like I did, a little cleanup in my garden, did a little weeding. I have some field bindweed in there, so I probably took out some columbine by accident. So I wouldn't be too concerned as long as you're seeing some seedlings. If you have nothing, no signs of any columbine, then I'd be a little worried that either it got too dry in that garden and and that none of the plants survived. But I'm guessing it might just be the parent plant that didn't make it, but the seedlings will take over for it. My garden is filled with columbine again, so there's hope.
Well, thank you so much, Melinda. Thanks to everyone for all of
Oh,
your questions tonight. This has been so interesting. And then again, we'll send out that follow-up email with the recording and handout. And I know we've got some homework questions as
right.
well, so send that out. And for the Milwaukee Public Library hosted webinars, I believe this is our last one until September.
With me, it is, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll have a little bit of a gap there, but please feel free to check out past webinars on our YouTube channel. They're all archived there. If you go to mpl.org, there's a YouTube icon on the top of the page. You can just click that and see what we have in the library there. And then actually I'll remember to include that link in the follow-up email as well. So you
Great.
can check it out in the meantime and enjoy your growing season. And
Yes.
yeah, and Melinda, please, if someone has a question in the meantime, where should they send that to?
Info@melindamyers.com and then put webinar attendee. It puts you at the top of the list. So don't tell your friends that didn't come to the webinar that. And if you ever see me, I love answering questions. So when I make an appearance, I always allow time to answer questions, just like we did tonight. Kelly, thank you for staying late and all of you who hung out here with us, but always happy to help and answer some questions. So if you even see me shopping, save me from buying more plants and talk to me and ask your questions. So info@melindamyers.com and then just in the subject, question from webinar attendee. That'd be great.
Thank you, Melinda. And
Thanks a lot,
also,
Kelly. Everybody
absolutely.
have a great growing season.
Yeah, happy summer, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you next time in September for our next webinar. Right, bye now.
Goodbye.